2E, non-positivist methodologies. Now, this non-positivist methodologies is the last subunit of the second unit. Now, in non-positivist methodologies, if you look at some of the questions, how does the dramaturgical perspective enable our understanding of everyday life? Do you think ethnomethodology helps us in getting reliable and valid data? How far are sociologists justified in using positivist approach to understand social reality? Right? And then, is non-positivism, positivist methodology scientific? Illustrate. Non-positivistic methodology is essential for understanding human behavior. Discuss. So these are the questions. Now, through this, what you get is, of course, dramaturgical these days, quite recently, of course, asked. Ethnomethodology, then phenomenology is also there. Then these are also reliable. Positivist, dramaturgical, and then non-positivist methodology, that's it. So basically these are some of the cues that can help us navigate better. So we can start with interpretive sociology or interpretive approach. Interpretive. So according to the Sage Dictionary of Sociology, interpretive sociology insists that we be concerned with how things appear to those whose actions we are trying to explain. So how things appear to those people whose actions we are trying to explain, how things appear to those. So to arrive at an adequate understanding of what their world looks like from the inside. So that's interpretive sociology. So which is why empathy is quite crucial, because you're trying to make sense of the world from the inside. So interpretive sociology can be defined as the study of society that focuses on discovering the meanings that people attach to their social world. Max Weber writes, he presents interpretive sociology or interpretivism as an alternate to positivism. And according to Max Weber, the core claim of interpretive sociology is that either the scientific approaches are inadequate for collecting, analyzing, or explaining data, or they are totally inappropriate. So there is an issue one way or another. Either they are inadequate, meaning they need to be complemented, or they are completely inappropriate, which means they need to be replaced. So that's where interpretive sociology comes in. And the word that Weber uses is the German word verstehen, which is to understand. Now, this is, which means empathic understanding of human behavior. Verstehen suggests that nothing can be understood from the outside. Well, that's the positivistic position. Things can be understood from the outside. Verstehen, interpretive, tells us nothing can be understood from the outside. And in order to study and understand society and social phenomena, we must enter, or we must step into the shoes of the other. Empathy. Right? This is something that is pointed out. What are the limitations of interpretive sociology, interpretive approach? Well, direct observation, they keep talking about direct observations issues. Now, direct observation also requires prior knowledge of the culture being studied. So these days, direct observation is not something that people just randomly start. Before that, there's a lot of homework that is done. There's a lot of task that is accomplished. The second criticism is interpretive sociology assumes that people in society consider their actions to be rational, which might not be the case always. And the third criticism is it has also been regarded as an inadequate account of action. Interpretive sociology presents an inadequate account of action. Why? Because it remains excessively individualistic. It does not look at the various ways in which social structures actually influence actors, right? So it presents an inadequate account of action. So within interpretive approach of sociology, we can talk about symbolic interactionism, phenomenology, and ethnomethodology. Now, symbolic interactionism, distinctly American. It's a distinctly American branch of sociology. Key thinkers are George Herbert Mead, Herbert Blumer, and Charles Horton Cooley. That's the trinity when it comes to symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is a social psychological perspective. It helps us understand the meeting grounds, sociology and psychology, the unit of analysis in symbolic interactionism is interaction. Symbolic interactionism tends to focus on small scale interactions in specific social situations. So it's not macro, it is of course micro. It does not get into large scale stuff or large scale social change. And symbolic interactionism's core argument is that societies are composed of interacting individuals who not only react, but so that's positivism, individuals react to an external stimuli. But symbolic interactionism points out that they not only react, but they perceive, they interpret, they act, and they create. So that's the basis of symbolic interactionism. They also say without symbols, there would be no human interaction. And without human interaction, there won't be any human society. So symbols remain very, very central to the existence of any human society. Then we have Herbert Blumer, who in this famous work of his, Society as a Symbolic Interaction, he outlines 3 core propositions. So this is a value addition. You can always use this. 3 core premises of symbolic interactionism. One is human beings act on the basis of meanings that they give to objects and events rather than simply reacting to an external stimuli. So basic external stimuli or internal stimuli. So in that sense, symbolic interactionism goes against some kind of societal determinism, and it also goes against biological determinism, because we are saying external stimuli also is questioned, internal stimuli is also questioned. Then Blumer also points out, point number 2, meanings arise from the process of interaction rather than simply being present at the outset. So meanings are not present at the outset itself. Meanings essentially arrive through the interaction. And lastly, meanings are the result of interpretive procedures. So as we get into an interactive setting, we are constantly interpreting each other's ideas, each other's words, etc. So meanings are the result of interpretive procedures employed by actors within interaction contexts. Then we have criticisms. So examining criticisms of symbolic interactionism, they examine human interaction in a vacuum. They project social life as too consensual, and basically they also do not get into figuring out why people consistently choose to act in specific ways. This is something that they don't really help us with, and also they fail to explain the most significant thing about meaning, which is their origin, the origin of meaning. Then we have phenomenology. Now, phenomenology, again, is an important perspective. The roots of phenomenology are to be found in the philosophy of Edmund Husserl and the sociology of Karl Mannheim. Phenomenology is considered as the most radical departure from scientific, quantitative, positivistic methodology. And what does phenomenology maintain? It maintains that it is not possible to objectively measure and classify the social world. It is simply not possible. So phenomenological sociology was first developed by Alfred Schutz, right? S-C-H-U-T-Z. Alfred Schutz. And in this, he draws our attention to the fundamental connections between human consciousness and social life, between the shape of social life and how people perceive, think, and talk about social life in their day-to-day lives. According to Blackwell Dictionary of Sociology, phenomenology is the study of conscious human experience in everyday life. So that's a quick definition. The core work that we have is Alfred Schutz's famous work, came out in 1932, The Phenomenology of the Social World. What are the core propositions? Phenomenologists regard understanding as the end product of sociological research. The idea is to go beyond the factual accounts and to look at common life experiences. Then phenomenology also differs from other social action approaches because it simply denies the possibility of explaining social action as such. Say social action can never be really explained as such. One can always have proximity, but it cannot be explained as such. The emphasis in phenomenology is upon social construction of reality. So basically, it's a sociological approach that sees the social world and the knowledge about the social world, both the things, as social construction, meaning people contribute to what gets identified as the social world and what gets established as a certain kind of a knowledge about that social world. Phenomenology's commitment is to description and not to explanation. Now, criticism, it's considered as theoretically lacking. The terminologies are very abstract, it's very philosophical. Philosophically, it's quite dense. Data gathering, if you do it phenomenologically, data gathering can take up a great deal of time and resources. Analysis and interpretation is not that easy. Not everyone can really conduct a phenomenological analysis. And policymakers, of course, do not really pay attention to phenomenological studies. They just do not consider it good enough, right? So they would rather go ahead with some survey or some questionnaire-based study as opposed to phenomenology. Then we have ethnomethodology. Ethnomethodology. Now, this is again Harold Garfinkel, and the work is Studies in Ethnomethodology, that came out in 1961. How does Garfinkel define it? He says ethnomethodological studies analyze everyday activities as members' methods for making those same activities visibly rational and reportable for all practical purposes. So that's the definition. But if you want a simpler definition, Sage Dictionary of Sociology says ethnomethodology is the systematic exploration of the techniques used by members of a society to perform the ordinary social tasks that make up that society's life. So people are seen as rational actors, but Garfinkel is very clear that when we talk about them as rational actors, we are not looking at them in terms of logical, formal logic or logical reasoning. We're looking at them in terms of practical reasoning. So in ethnomethodology, the insistence is more on practical reasoning and not on simple formal logic. Then it also points out that people, and this is a very important point, people are not to be treated as cultural dopes, but they are to be treated as skill members, right? They are not cultural dopes, meaning culture is not constantly determining what people are doing. Then they also pay a lot of attention to informal conversations, because in informal conversations, shared understandings and knowledge actually come out very clearly. Then it moves even further away from a structural approach by denying the existence of a social structure. So ethnomethodology is clear, social structure does not exist. It also points out that social order is also not a real thing. Social order has some patterns because members perceive those patterns. Because we perceive that there are patterns, there are patterns. As such, the patterns are not there on their own. So he uses a very interesting phrase. He says social order as a convenient fiction. Social order as a convenient fiction. Now, if you look at some of the criticisms, Goldner points out in Coming Crisis of Western Sociology, he criticized it for its triviality. He says that basically ethnomethodology deals with absolutely trivial aspects of life, and it refers to things that everybody knows already. Anthony Giddens also points out that the society that is portrayed by ethnomethodologists, in this society, the members lack any motive or goal. Then there is no consideration of the operations of power. Ethnomethodologists do not speak about the operations of power in society. When we talk about social relationships, can we really study social relationships without looking at how power works in these domains? Then it provides little explanation for social change. It ignores what people can do or how their behavior changes once they confront novel experiences. Now, just in terms of anticipation, so far what we have done is, in the light of PYQs, we have looked at non-positivist methodologies, promise, core areas, limitations. But let's look at some possible anticipated questions. So, for example, can we think of phenomenology and ethnomethodology similarities and differences? Now, if you're looking at similarities, both of them have roots in the philosophy of Edmund Husserl and the sociology of Karl Mannheim. Both, contrary to the traditional positivistic sociology, both ethnomethodology and phenomenology turn their interest to extremely subjectivistic, privatistic, and individualistic phenomena in the social arena, meaning they were both very much micro in terms of their orientation. They are both predicated on the point of view of the actor. Then, according to both the schools, phenomenology as well as ethnomethodology, what really is there is irrelevant. What really is there? What is relevant is what is thought to be there. So, what really is there is irrelevant. What is thought to be there by a social group is something that is central. But so that's about the similarities. Now, when it comes to differences between phenomenology and ethnomethodology, how do we look at the differences? Now, so phenomenological sociology, the foundational core of meaning in man's world is that of immediate consciousness. So, phenomenology is interested in immediate consciousness. Ethnomethodology is interested in immediately present, directly observed social situation. Immediately present, directly observed social situation, that's the foundational core. And immediate consciousness, that's the foundational core for phenomenology. Now, the domain of phenomenological inquiry necessarily is limited to the analysis and interpretation of recognizable structures. So again, immediate consciousness related stuff. Ethnomethodological inquiry is focused on the limited perimeter of human activity. So here, activity, there, consciousness. Then they also differ, phenomenology and ethnomethodology, they differ in their disciplinary orientations. Phenomenology borrows from philosophy as well, whereas ethnomethodology has linkages with symbolic interactionism. They are also different in terms of the research questions. For phenomenology, it's around immediate consciousness. For ethnomethodology, it is directly observed social situation. And then levels of analysis. So phenomenology has a wider canvas compared to ethnomethodology. Phenomenology works with bracketing, it works with reduction, whereas ethnomethodology looks at members' methods that go into performing everyday tasks. Phenomenology does not altogether deny the existence of social structure and social order, whereas ethnomethodology does. It actually considers, it declares social order as a convenient fiction. Now, as we head towards the end, dramaturgical approach. Now, this is a particular kind of interactional or interactionist method popularized by Erving Goffman, Canadian sociologist. Erving Goffman. And Goffman wrote a book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And in that book, this is something that is absolutely, fully, properly spelt out. Now, basically, the dramaturgical approach derives from the interpretive approach and compares everyday life to the setting of a drama, a stage, a theater kind of a thing. So Blackwell Dictionary of Sociology tells us the dramaturgical approach is a method that uses theoretical metaphor of stage, actors, and audience to observe and analyze the intricacies of social interaction. The primary focus has been to understand the process of impression management. So it's a very important reference, impression management, because individuals not only present themselves to each other in a presentable manner, they also attempt to manage the image that they present. So dramaturgical is all about studying impression management. Then there is this thing called front stage, backstage. Again, in theater, if you're aware of theater, you know what is front stage, backstage. Front stage describes the area where day-to-day interaction takes place between actors who give a performance and there is an audience, at least presumably there is an audience. Backstage refers to the area where an actor abandons all the pretense associated with the front stage performance and relaxes from being in character. So basically, what dramaturgical approach does is it provides a very, very complex dimension to the action perspective. Goffman's work, Asylums, is very much based on the dramaturgical approach. There are also criticisms of the dramaturgical approach. Impression management involves concealment of data. Individuals are more than their roles. And if we are acting all the time, if in every encounter we are acting, we are not really true to ourselves, then there is a deceitfulness and lack of morality in every front stage performance. Then a dramaturgical approach represents human life as being composed merely of appearances. Then we have feminism, and I don't want to go into the details of feminism because this is something that you have already done. So within feminism, radical feminism, liberal feminism, Marxist socialist feminism. Then there is critical social science. Again, a possible 10 marker, critical social science. Again, a non-positivist methodology. Now, critical social science is to be traced back to Lee Harvey, his famous work, Critical Social Research, that came out in 1990. Critical social science embraces all those approaches in sociology that aim to be critical of society in order to facilitate social change. Critique is an integral part of research in critical social science. Critical social science insists that the way society appears to its members can be misleading. Critical social science points out that knowledge is a process and one perpetually understands the social world. Nobody understands the world full and final. One is always endlessly understanding the world. The new knowledge that is acquired can always be used to transform the society. Then there is postmodernism. Postmodernism, again, very simple, very powerful non-positivist methodology. They point out social, so it became very influential in the 70s and 80s. They point out social world is exceedingly complex, which is why there cannot be any general theory that informs us about society work. So they talk about plurality, multiplicity of theories. They take extremely radical perspectives. They say no theories are needed for the postmodern. They say new theories are needed for the postmodern age, because what is happening is social behavior is no longer shaped by people's behavior. Earlier it was, but no longer is the case. People are much freer now. So they are demonstrating their agency in much more radical ways. They have more choice, which is why the overall living landscape has changed. Boundaries are breaking down, so you need new theories. The second point that they make is that there is no solid foundation for producing knowledge about society. All knowledge is based upon language, and they say language can never ever describe the external world perfectly. Then you also have someone like Jean Baudrillard, Baudrillard, who points out, who writes a lot about hyperreality, simulacra, etc. And he points out that the society has become so saturated with media images, and I think this works in our case. Society has become so saturated with media images that people now confuse media characters with real life. So the image has become more important and more prominent and more legitimate than the real. And postmodernists argue that the job of the researcher is to talk about differences rather than drawing generalizations. So unlike positivism, which is all about generalization, postmodernism is talking about differences, plurality, multiplicity, fluidity. Sociologists should not try to impose their views on others, but should enable the voices of different people to be heard. So with this, we come to the end of non-positivist methodologies. And also with this, we come to the end of this discussion, which was about Unit 2, Sociology as Science, from Paper 2. So what we did was we looked at various PYQs pertaining to different sections of this, different subunits of this particular unit. And through these PYQs, we arrived at the recurrent patterns, the themes that are constantly, regularly invoked. And in the light of that, we did a quick summarizing of the entire unit with, of course, as much of value addition as and when it was possible. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'll see you very soon with the recording on the third unit, which is research methods and techniques. Thank you. All the very best.